What happens when Hollywood royalty steps up to defend another icon? On a day meant to celebrate classic film, The View turned into a war zone of words when Joy Behar made one comment too many about Julie Andrews. What followed was an emotional defense from Julia Roberts that left the audience cheering, the panel divided, and Joy Behar completely stunned. Buckle up, because this wasn't just television. It was a Hollywood moment for the history books. The bright studio lights of The View bathed the table in a warm glow as Julia Roberts, still Hollywood's America's sweetheart after decades in the business, smiled graciously at the panel. She had been invited to talk about her latest film, a nostalgic love letter to the golden age of musicals. Whoopi Goldberg, as usual, handled the introduction. We are thrilled to have Julia Roberts here today. She's starring in a new movie celebrating classic Hollywood and the greats who paved the way, including, of course, the incomparable Julie Andrews. The audience erupted into applause, some even whistling in excitement. Julia beamed, leaning toward the audience to say, "Thank you so much. It's great to be here." It was supposed to be a feel-good segment, until Joy Behar made one of those offhand remarks that seemed harmless, but carried a sharp edge. Joy leaned back in her chair, smirking as she tapped her note cards. I mean, Julie Andrews, sure, she was great back then, but does she really still matter to audiences today? People barely even watch musicals anymore. The room shifted almost instantly. A few awkward laughs bubbled from the audience, but most people simply went quiet. Julia froze mid-smile, her eyes blinking in disbelief. She tilted her head slightly, giving Joy a look that was more confused than angry at first. "Excuse me? Did you just say Julie Andrews doesn't matter anymore?" Joy shrugged casually, as if the comment was harmless. "Look, I'm just saying times change. Kids today don't know the sound of music. They're watching TikTok, not singing about hills being alive, you know?" The audience let out a collective ooh. A woman in the front row shook her head, muttering, "Not Julie Andrews," under her breath. Julia sat back in her chair, clearly weighing her next words. She smiled politely, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Joy, Julie Andrews isn't just some random celebrity from the past. She's one of the reasons movies like mine even exist. She set the bar for grace, for talent, for class, things we desperately need today." Joy, seemingly amused at Julia's tone, chuckled. "Okay, but let's not pretend singing nannies are relevant in 2025. It's nostalgia, Julia. People have moved on." Julia turned her whole body to face Joy now, her expression no longer playful. "Julie Andrews changed people's lives. Do you have any idea how many kids grew up watching The Sound of Music when their home life was hard? How many parents sat with their kids and found joy in those songs? That's not irrelevant, Joy. That's timeless." The audience erupted into applause, some even standing briefly. Anna Navarro raised her eyebrows and whispered into her microphone, "Wow, okay, we're going there early today." Whoopi tried to redirect. Okay, let's talk about Julia's film." But Julia wasn't done yet. She leaned forward, her voice lower but firmer. "Joy, you can have your opinion, but don't dismiss a woman who gave the world so much. Julie Andrews represents the kind of artistry we wish we had more of today. Kindness, elegance, talent without ego. That's rare now." Joy waved her hand dismissively. "I'm not saying she wasn't talented, Julia. I'm just saying she's not really relevant anymore. People move on." Julia's voice sharpened. "Maybe people like you do, Joy, but some of us believe in honoring those who paved the way. Julie Andrews is the reason so many actors, myself included, even believed they could do this job." The audience burst into cheers, a chant of "Julie, Julie," briefly breaking out in one corner. Whoopi leaned back, clearly surprised by the pushback, and muttered, "Wow, touchy subject, huh?" Julia smiled tightly. "When it comes to Julie Andrews, absolutely." The energy on set had completely changed. What began as a lighthearted interview had turned into a cultural debate in seconds, and Julia Roberts had just made it clear she wasn't backing down. The studio was silent for a beat after Julia Roberts' sharp, "When it comes to Julie Andrews, absolutely." Julia sat a little taller now, her body angled toward Joy, eyes locked in unflinching focus. She hadn't raised her voice, not yet, but her tone carried the unmistakable energy of someone who'd just drawn a line in the sand. Whoopi Goldberg tried to bring the tone down, clasping her hands together. "All right, so what we're really talking about here is how we celebrate legacy, right? Julia, you're saying it's important. Joy, you're saying culture moves on." But Julia wasn't letting go. She turned to the audience, her voice soft but firm. "Do you know what Julie Andrews gave us? She gave us a generation of films that reminded people there's good in the world, that kindness, compassion, and love still matter." The audience applauded softly. Julia kept going. "When she sang My Favorite Things or stood on that hill singing The Sound of Music, she wasn't just entertaining us, she was giving people hope, real hope, during times when life was really hard." And I think dismissing that as just nostalgia is not only unfair, it's wrong. Joy folded her arms, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "Julia, I'm not tearing her down. I said she was great in her time, but kids today aren't waking up thinking about Julie Andrews. They're on TikTok and watching Marvel movies. Culture moves forward. It always has." Julia tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing just a fraction. Culture can move forward without erasing the people who built it. Julie Andrews is why we have people like Anne Hathaway, Hugh Jackman, or even me, frankly. Her work opened doors for actors to bring musical storytelling to the big screen. The audience clapped louder now, with a few shouting, "That's right!" Anna Navarro leaned forward, sensing drama but trying to mediate. "Maybe the question is, how do we balance respecting the past with celebrating new voices? Can't we do both?" Julia nodded at Anna, but turned back to Joy. "That's all I'm saying. We can love Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet and still honor Julie Andrews. There's room for all of it. But dismissing her as irrelevant, that's where I draw the line." Joy chuckled under her breath, shaking her head. "Julia, you're emotional about this because she's your hero. But to the average person out there, she's just an old movie star." That was the trigger. Julia leaned forward, one hand on the table, her voice a touch louder, the emotion starting to break through. "She's not just an old movie star, Joy. She's a legend who showed the world that grace and kindness can be powerful. And you know what? We need more of that right now, not less." The audience erupted, clapping and cheering so loud that production had to drop the audio levels slightly. Whoopi raised her eyebrows, clearly intrigued at how intense things had gotten so quickly. "Okay, well, we definitely have some strong opinions at the table today." But Julia wasn't finished. She looked toward the audience, her voice softer, but full of conviction. "You know, there's this idea floating around that everything old is irrelevant. But sometimes what's old is exactly what we need. Julie Andrews taught generations about dignity and humility, two things we could all use a little more of in today's world." She then looked back at Joy, locking eyes. "So when I hear someone say she doesn't matter, I take issue with that. Because people like Julie Andrews do matter. They're part of our cultural DNA. And just because someone doesn't have a TikTok doesn't mean their legacy is gone." The audience stood up, many clapping and shouting, "Preach!" and "That's right!" Joy, trying to lighten it up, rolled her eyes and said, "Wow, I didn't realize I was going to get the Julie Andrews fan club treatment today." Julia smiled thinly. "Maybe you should have realized it the moment you dismissed one of the greatest actresses of all time." Even Whoopi chuckled at that, muttering under her breath, "Oh boy, here we go." At that moment, the energy shifted. It was no longer about old versus new Hollywood. It was personal. Julia had made it clear this wasn't just about a celebrity. This was about respect, legacy, and values. The audience roared again, one man shouting, "Julie forever!" Julia, feeling the love, finally leaned back but didn't break eye contact with Joy. Julie Andrews matters. And if you can't see that, maybe you've forgotten what made Hollywood magical in the first place.
Julia Roberts sat back for a moment, letting the applause die down. She inhaled deeply, clearly debating whether to open up further. When she finally leaned toward the microphone, her tone softened but carried more weight than before. "Can I tell you something personal?" The audience quieted, leaning in. Even Joy Behar uncrossed her arms slightly, curious. Julia smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "When I was a little girl, growing up in Smyrna, Georgia, my mom worked 2 jobs. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had this tiny TV with a busted antenna. Every Christmas, one channel would air The Sound of Music, and every single year, without fail, my mom and I would sit down on our old couch, eat whatever we could afford, usually popcorn, and watch Julie Andrews sing on that mountain." Her voice trembled slightly, but she pushed forward. "For those 2 hours, it didn't matter how hard life was. We were somewhere else. Julie made us feel like everything would be okay, like there was still magic in the world. That wasn't just a movie. That was medicine for the soul." A hush fell over the audience, many nodding in silent agreement. A woman in the second row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Julia smiled softly, looking down at the table before continuing, "I'm sitting here today because of that feeling, because of her. Julie Andrews is the reason I even believed in acting. Watching her taught me you could move people without cruelty, without shock value, just pure heart and talent. That's what I chased when I started out."
She looked directly at Joy now, her voice still gentle but unwavering. "So when I hear someone say she's irrelevant, it hurts. Because to a 10-year-old girl on a worn-out couch, she was everything. And I know I'm not the only one who feels that way." The audience erupted into cheers and applause again, many standing. One older man shouted, "We love you, Julia," while another voice yelled, "Julie Andrews forever!" Joy Behar, visibly uncomfortable but still defensive, tried to interject. "I'm not saying she didn't mean something to you, Julia. I'm saying today's kids—" Julia cut in, shaking her head. "Joy, every generation has their icons, but some people transcend generations. Julie Andrews is one of them. I was a kid in the late 70s watching a film from the 60s, and it still changed my life. Don't tell me kids today can't experience that same magic if we let them." Ana Navarro nodded, softly adding, "That's true. I mean, there are movies my mom showed me as a kid that still stick with me today." Whoopi leaned forward, sensing the gravity of Julia's words. "So what you're saying, Julia, is it's not just about movies. It's about connection." Julia nodded firmly. "Exactly. It's about something bigger than entertainment. Julie Andrews taught people to dream, to believe, to be kind. That doesn't expire because TikTok is popular. If anything, we need it more than ever." The camera zoomed in on Julia's eyes, shimmering now as she blinked back tears. She smiled apologetically at the audience. "Sorry,
I feel really strongly about this. A woman from the audience shouted, "Don't apologize," prompting laughter and a fresh wave of applause. Julia clasped her hands together. We talk so much about what's trending, what's hot, who's relevant today, but sometimes it's the people who aren't chasing relevance who leave the biggest mark. Julie Andrews wasn't trying to be trendy, she was trying to make something beautiful. And she did. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and the audience collectively sighed in empathy. Joy, clearly feeling the pressure, muttered quietly, "Okay, I get it. She means a lot to you. Fine." Julia glanced at Joy, a small smile forming. "She means a lot to millions of people, Joy. And I think we owe it to them and to ourselves not to forget that." The crowd erupted again, this time into a full standing ovation. Julia took a deep breath, visibly emotional but composed, as Whoopi leaned in. "Okay, we need to go to break, but wow, Julia, that was beautiful." Julia nodded, wiping one eye quickly. "Thank you. I had to say it." As the camera panned across the audience, many still on their feet, it was clear the tone of the conversation had shifted entirely. What started as a debate about relevance had turned into a deeply human moment about memory, values, and the people who shaped who we are. The studio's energy was electric as the show returned from commercial break. Julia Roberts, still visibly emotional but collected, sipped her water. Joy Behar, however, seemed determined to reclaim control of the conversation. Joy leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Julia, look, I didn't mean to upset you, but we have to be realistic. Hollywood can't live in the past. If we keep romanticizing these old figures, we're ignoring new talent." Julia straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. Her tone was calm but firm, each word deliberate. "Julie, look, I didn't mean to upset you, but we have to be realistic. Hollywood can't live in the past. If we keep romanticizing these old figures, we're ignoring new talent." Julia straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. Her tone was calm but firm, each word deliberate. "Joy, respecting history isn't ignoring the present. Julie Andrews doesn't take away from Zendaya or Florence Pugh or anyone else. We can celebrate all of them. That's what culture is supposed to be, additive, not subtractive." Joy shrugged dismissively. "But culture evolves. People don't want singing nannies in the age of streaming and CGI superheroes." Julia leaned in, placing both hands on the table, her voice rising. "You're missing the point. Julie Andrews isn't just about singing nannies. She's about hope, kindness, dignity. Do you honestly think the world has outgrown those things?" The audience cheered loudly, clapping and shouting, "That's right!" Joy raised her voice too. "You're emotional because it's your childhood, but I'm talking about cultural relevance for today's kids." Julia interrupted, sharper now. "Today's kids need Julie Andrews more than ever, Joy. With everything they're bombarded with, cynicism, division, cruelty, Julie's work is a reminder that kindness is strength, that joy is revolutionary. You think that's irrelevant? I think it's essential." The crowd erupted, many standing and applauding. Whoopi interjected quickly, all right, this is getting heated." But Julia turned to the audience, voice filled with emotion. "We can't keep dismissing the things that gave us hope just because they're not trending. Julie Andrews taught me, and millions like me, to believe life could be beautiful. That matters, no matter what year it is." The audience erupted in chants of "Julie, Julie, Julie," as Julia leaned back, chest rising and falling, while Joy sat back, visibly outnumbered and quietly muttering, "Wow, okay."
The audience was still buzzing from Julia's emotional declaration when Whoopi Goldberg raised her hands to calm the room. All right. Let's hear from the audience real quick. Clearly, people have strong feelings about Julie Andrews." A woman in the second row stood up, clutching a small program from the Sound of Music Broadway revival. Her voice trembled. "I grew up watching Julie Andrews with my grandmother. She taught me to sing when I couldn't even read yet. Those movies are why I became a music teacher. She matters. She will always matter." The audience clapped as Julia smiled warmly, her eyes glistening again. Another audience member, a young man in his 20s wearing a Mary Poppins t-shirt, stood up. "I'm Gen Z, and I still watch Mary Poppins every year. Julie Andrews is cool. She is not irrelevant. She's a legend." The room erupted with cheers, and Julia covered her mouth, visibly moved. A woman in her 60s, clutching her daughter's hand, shouted from the back, "Julie Andrews helped me through my divorce. Those songs kept me going. People don't forget that kind of impact." Joy sat quietly, arms folded, as applause filled the studio once again. Julia leaned toward her microphone, voice thick with gratitude. "See, Joy? This is what I'm talking about. She's more than just an actress. She's part of people's lives. And that doesn't disappear because times change." The audience responded with a standing ovation, chanting again, "Julie! Julie! Julie!" Whoopi grinded the camera. "Well, looks like Julie Andrews has quite a fan club in here today."
Joy Behar, clearly feeling the weight of the audience's overwhelming support for Julia, leaned forward again, her voice sharper than before. "Okay, fine. She was great back then. But Julia, you're acting like criticizing her relevance is some kind of personal attack. It's just the truth. The world moves on." Julia froze, her expression shifting from disbelief to determination. She placed her hands on the table, leaning toward Joy, her voice lower but carrying a powerful intensity. "Joy, you're missing something important. Legacy isn't just about being trending or viral. Legacy is about impact, and Julie Andrews has impacted more lives than you could ever measure." The audience cheered loudly, sensing something big was coming. Julia continued, her voice rising. "You can roll your eyes at nostalgia all you want, but for some of us, for millions of us, Julie Andrews was hope in dark times. You don't get to dismiss that because you think it's old-fashioned." Joy tried to interject, but Julia's momentum was unstoppable now. Every kid who sang along to Do Re Mi, every parent who found joy watching her films after a hard day, they carry that with them forever. That's not irrelevant joy. That's timeless. The audience stood up again, clapping and cheering so loud the producers had to hold the segment from cutting to commercial. Julia turned to the crowd, voice breaking slightly. "Some things, some people never stop mattering. Julie Andrews is one of them." The audience erupted into the loudest applause of the day, a standing ovation echoing across the studio. Whoopi, shaking her head and smiling, muttered, "Wow, okay, I think we've hit a nerve today." The studio stood in applause, some audience members wiping away tears, others chanting Julie Andrews' name. Julia Roberts sat back, her eyes moist but her smile steady. She placed a hand over her heart, visibly touched by the response. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice catching slightly. "I didn't come here planning to get emotional, but Julie Andrews gave me, and so many people, a reason to believe in the goodness of the world. And I guess I just can't sit quietly when someone says that doesn't matter anymore." The audience erupted again, a long wave of applause rolling through the studio. Even Anna Navarro leaned forward, nodding sympathetically. "Julia, I think a lot of us needed to hear that today." Julia smiled warmly at Anna, then glanced at Joy. "We may not agree, Joy, but I hope we can agree that what she gave to people has value, then and now. Joy, to her credit, gave a small nod and muttered, "Fair enough." Whoopi, sensing the moment, closed her cards and smiled toward the camera. Well, this started as an interview about Julia's new movie, but I think we ended up with something bigger. Maybe the takeaway is this: sometimes honoring the past reminds us what kind of future we actually want. The audience erupted one last time, giving Julia a standing ovation as the camera zoomed out. Julia, waving gently, looked into the lens and smiled. Julie Andrews matters. She always will. The outro music swelled, and producers knew instantly this was a viral moment.
As the outro music faded and the cameras pulled back, Julia Roberts remained seated, hand still over her heart, visibly overwhelmed by the audience chanting Julie Andrews' name. It wasn't just applause anymore, it was a statement, a collective voice declaring that some legacies are too powerful to fade. Julia smiled warmly, looking straight into the camera. If one thing is clear from today, it's this: kindness, artistry, and grace never go out of style. Julie Andrews represents the best of us, and I hope we never forget that. The audience roared once more, some still on their feet, waving at Julia. Even Joy Behar, who had been so combative earlier, offered a small clap, clearly aware that the tide of public opinion had firmly swung Julia's way. Whoopi Goldberg, shaking her head with a chuckle, wrapped things up. "Well, we planned to talk about Julia's new film, but what we got was a masterclass in loyalty and heart. Julia, thank you for reminding us why we love these conversations, even when they get heated." Julia laughed softly, tucking her hair behind her ear as she stood to wave at the audience one last time. "Thank you for letting me speak from the heart, and thank you, Julie Andrews, for everything." The camera zoomed out to capture the standing ovation, a moment destined to trend online within hours. This wasn't just celebrity drama anymore. It was a cultural moment, a reminder of why icons endure and why defending them still matters. If you loved this story, hit that subscribe button for more legendary clashes, emotional showdowns, and powerful moments just like this one. Drop your thoughts below. Who should defend their hero next? Again, this story is a work of fan-based fiction inspired by publicly available information and general social media discussions. It is created purely for entertainment purposes and does not depict any actual events or real conversations. There is no evidence that the events, dialogues, or situations described ever occurred in reality.